Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jackie Phillips, and I serve as the Senior Coordinator for Student Engagement in the Department of Engagement, Leadership, and Service. We're so excited to have you join us for today's session of the Student Organization Zoom series focused on running effective meetings. This is one of my favorite topics when talking about student organizations and such an important component of the work that student organizations do, but then also a skill that can be so helpful in whatever is next. So beyond just a student organization, but outside involvements, professional roles, it's really important to just know how to run an effective meetings and then the different characteristics that go into effective meetings. So during today's session, some of the goals are to recognize elements of effective meetings and then also being able to identify specific steps to running efficient but also collaborative meetings. And so I hope by the end of this session in just a little bit that these are some of the things that we've touched on, but feel free if any questions come up during this to send those in the chat, or if you're watching the recording, feel free to send those along to our email, which is ugaels@uga.edu. So to get us started, if everyone could just take a quick moment and think about some different meeting traits that you've seen that have either been really effective, so things that you've really enjoyed, or traits that you've seen that have been ineffective or have had you leaving going, this could have been an email, or I didn't really love that. Feel free, if you're watching the recording, to jot these down. If you're here live with us, feel free to send it in the chat or to unmute yourself and share what some of those characteristics, either good or bad, are.
I would say, in my experience, effective meetings would have set goals. So set goals with, set action plans after the meetings. I think meetings that don't have that are when that should have just been an email, or that should have had more preparation going into it, and can be frustrating. So as long as you can get something, hard, concrete out of that meeting, I think it could be deemed effective.
Yes, definitely. Thanks so much for sharing. I agree. Goals are definitely important, or having a substantive action items during a meeting or something that's discussed or decided on. Any other thoughts? Any other traits? I know one I commonly hear is discussion, but no decisions are made. So just talking over and over, talking at one another, but not actually making any decisions or any next steps.
Yeah. One that I had is also kind of an ineffective one is when either the leader of the meeting or just another person in the meeting just talks and talks and talks and doesn't really give anyone else a chance to speak. And particularly over Zoom meetings, I think that's particularly hard because it's hard to interrupt or like raise a hand and have everyone see that.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I think having more virtual meetings definitely makes that harder too, to really make sure that everyone's included and has the opportunity to speak and share their opinions. So I think these are some of the things that we'll touch on today. And then I also have just found it really helpful personally to take the time to think about it so that when I go in and lead meetings, that different things that I want to be aware of or to make sure I do. So I encourage anyone that is leading meetings or watching this or participating to think through some of those different traits too, so that you're more aware of them and then can either make changes or be more cognizant or talk about it with your exec board of how can we maybe change some of the things that we don't love or that we might be seeing come up within our meetings. So to start us off, some of the things that I have found that waste time during meetings or maybe aren't the most effective are tardiness. So when people are late or if we start a meeting late, so folks coming in, whether it's on Zoom or in person, 10 minutes later and then missing some content or not really knowing what's going on. So really sharing, okay, this is the time we're going to get started, but then also following through with that if you were the one leading, making sure that you start on time and that you share the expectation that others are there on time. Or if they can't be there on time, that they're going to share that so it's less distracting when someone joins late. And then also so that there can be a plan for how do we catch them up on what they missed so that we're not spending time going back over the same things that we've already spent time talking about. Additionally, when someone forgets, so oftentimes I know people are like, I'm so sorry, I forgot. So that might also lead to tardiness. But thinking about how can we remind people of this meeting and make sure that they're prepared and know what they need to know. So thinking through how can we make sure that members aren't forgetting And then also sharing with them, this is our set meeting schedule, or finding ways to continue reminding each other of our meetings so that this is one way that we don't end up wasting time during an official meeting. Similarly, not starting on time, or as we kind of touched on before, personal stories. So folks kind of getting way off topic, not talking about what was agreed upon or what the main goal of a meeting was, and sharing personal stories. You definitely want that social aspect. So providing a space where folks can build community and get to know one another and share different facets of their own lives, but also figuring out, okay, when are we going to do that and how are we going to do it so that it's not taking up the majority of the meeting and getting off track. With that, off-topic discussions. So, and we'll talk more about agendas in just a minute, but thinking through, okay, these are the things we need to discuss during this meeting, and this is how much time we have to discuss them. And so if we need to take the conversation in a different direction, or if something comes up that doesn't really relate to this topic, figuring out how to reroute that, since we waste a lot of time during meetings getting way off topic and talking about things that we didn't necessarily agree to meet about in the first place. Similarly, lack of information or resources. So really thinking about how can we make sure everyone is prepared for a meeting? What information do they need to know ahead of time? So if a student organization is meeting to talk about the budget and how you want to spend money, talking through, okay, what resources do we need to provide beforehand to make sure that everyone comes in with knowledge on the topic to really have a good, productive discussion. Similarly, meetings that go over a lot of time. I know that we've all been there when we say a meeting is going to be an hour and it ends up going an hour and a half or even longer, which makes us kind of dread the next one, not knowing how long it's going to be. So really thinking about how long is this going to be and planning accordingly, because it can be very frustrating to members when a meeting isn't going for the time that was allotted. And then lastly, technology. I know with us going virtual on many things, sometimes technology just goes wrong. I have been at fault many times of not testing it beforehand or something coming up. So remaining adaptable, but trying your best to test technology before a meeting, running things through with other exec members, practicing, so that during the meeting we're not wasting time trying to figure out how to make Zoom work or how to make a game work or whatever it is. So definitely think about testing technology beforehand so that time's not wasted and can be used more effectively. So how do you plan for a meeting? I think the first and one of the most important things is really to think about the purpose of a meeting. So asking yourself and asking your fellow exec or general body members, why are we meeting? And then from there asking, is this meeting necessary? Is it something that we can talk about in our GroupMe or Slack? Is it something that we can talk about through email? Is it something that we need to discuss, or is it going to be primarily updates? And then if it is necessary, asking, is this for information sharing or is it for decision making? So letting people know, hey, this is what we're going to be discussing and needing to come with a decision on, or this is what we're going to be voting on. But really thinking through what is the purpose of this, because if you see that it's all information sharing, while that is important to have to make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone knows how the organization's moving forward, it might be something where you can touch base via email and not have to meet as frequently. So maybe not having a meeting every single week if it's going to be the same updates, but really thinking through what new information do we have, and then what are we meeting about? And so really talking through and asking these three questions of why are we meeting? Is it necessary? And then what is the purpose, or is this information sharing or decision making, to really know going into the meeting what your main goal is in establishing that. And then even more importantly, sharing that out so folks know what they're coming to and what they need to do to prepare. So after you figured out the purpose, it's also really important to think about the participants. So who needs to be there? And so I always start with how many people will be attending. So that can help me determine the format. Now with COVID, thinking about, okay, can this occur in person? Can we do it safely? Do we have the space to socially distance and make sure everyone's comfortable and that we're prioritizing everyone's health? Or do we need to meet virtually through Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever other platform? So thinking about how many people are going to be coming, how many people need to be there. If it's something that only 2 committees or 2 people need to talk about, do you need to talk about it as a large group, or is it something that you can set up a separate one-on-one conversation about? So thinking about how many people need to be there, and then how do you involve everyone? So once you've determined who needs to be there, whether it's a general body meeting or if it's an exec meeting or maybe a individual conversation, is then making sure that everyone feels included. And with that, ensuring that members know that their opinion matters and that you want to hear it. And so making them aware of their importance to the group. And so oftentimes it's recognizing good ideas, providing space for everyone to share. And so I found it really helpful to share that with the group and to also continue to remind them of that every time we meet. I would love to hear other thoughts on this. Does anyone else have any other opinions? So that they're not just showing up to constantly listen and not be involved, but reminding them and finding ways to continue engaging with them and to support them and to provide them a welcoming environment and knowing that their voice matters and that you want to hear it. Then I think with perspective, when thinking about who would be attending, thinking about all the different perspectives and maybe how can you get other ideas on it. And so even if it is something very specific to a committee within your organization, so I'll use marketing as an example, could those involved in events committees or other positions, could they add value? Could they provide feedback? Of finding times that when you are sharing those updates, once again, providing a space for others to share their opinions and to provide feedback. So once you've figured out the purpose and the participants, next is creating an agenda. So an agenda defines the purpose of the meeting. And so when keeping in mind the purpose, you're going to want to think about the time constraints. So how long do you have to meet? How long is going to be too long based on everyone's schedule or how much you have to discuss? And then also thinking about the number of items on your agenda and then the process. And so oftentimes this might already be outlined within governing documents. So I encourage student organizations to look over their governing documents and seeing if it states what elements or which components need to be included in a meeting and what the process for voting on certain things might be. But then also thinking about, okay, these are the XYZ items that we need to talk about, and then in what order. So oftentimes listing the most important ones first on the agenda, so that if you say, hey, we're gonna meet for an hour, and you see it takes 30 minutes to talk about the first item, and maybe you're not gonna get to some of the others, that at least you've talked about the things that are more pressing, or that maybe have a deadline coming up, or things that really need to be decided first. And then I think with the process, if it's not outlined in your governing documents, thinking about, okay, what's going to work best for our organization and how can we make sure everyone knows how we're going to go about this? So also outlining that on the agenda. So possibly including how long you're going to discuss an item. So, putting a time limit on it so that you're not talking in circles and saying, okay, we're going to discuss this for 20 minutes. And then we'll move into a vote. So making clear on the agenda what the process will be and any time limits for it. One thing that I have found really helpful is a parking lot. So this is a component of the agenda where essentially you add things in as they come up during the meeting that weren't originally on the agenda. So for example, if we were planning to talk about an upcoming event, so we are having an online trivia night, and someone comes up with a really great idea while we're discussing the logistics of a future event, so now they want to also plan a movie night. So while we're talking about the trivia night, I'll add the movie night to our parking lot. So I'll just add it into the agenda so that if we have time at the end of the meeting, we'll readdress it and we'll come back to it. This way we're not going off topic, talking about something else and losing the original chain of thought that we had, and then lose track of time to where we don't even finish planning out the trivia night. So a parking lot is just a area on the agenda where you can put ideas, comments, things that come up during the meeting that weren't originally planned to be talked about that you want to revisit. So if you don't have time, you can always revisit the parking lot for the next meeting. And this can be really helpful that when you're creating the next agenda, you kind of have a starting place of, okay, these are some of the things we need to discuss based on what has come up during the previous meeting. And then lastly, communicate. So chat with people about what they need to talk about in a meeting so that it can be put on the agenda in the beginning so that there's no surprises during the meeting. So reaching out to exec and saying, hey, what are some of the things that we have to talk about during our next meeting, whether it's your exec meeting or for the general body meeting, so that it's all shared out on the agenda so everyone knows these are some of our goals for the night and that things are included so that everyone, once again, can do their research and come prepared to chat about it. So when thinking about your agenda items specifically, they should be specific and then include times, and then also be results oriented. So I like to think of these similar to SMART goals. So your agenda items being the things that need to be done. So an example of that is brainstorm new ideas for monthly newsletter. So let's say your organization is wanting to put out a monthly newsletter with upcoming events, different announcements, but you want to chat with everyone about what might be included on that, what they want to hear about, what format, or if monthly is not the frequency you want to go with. And so you're going to put that on your agenda. Maybe include then with like different bullet points, some of the different components that you want to talk about with it, and then how long you plan to spend on it. And this can hold yourself accountable and the organization accountable to chat about it, make a decision, but not spend your entire meeting time talking about that one component. So think about, okay, what is it that we're trying to discuss and come to a conclusion on, and then set a time for it, just so everyone knows, okay, this is how we're breaking up our meeting today. While it is a lot of pre-planning, it definitely can help make the meeting go smoother and be much more efficient. And then where to begin, definitely, like I mentioned before, look through your governing documents, see if anything's listed in there on how things need to be voted on, how often meetings have to occur, potentially what you have to meet about. I know many constitutions mention that anything concerning money or membership has to be voted on, and so that can also help you determine what type of agenda items need to appear during meetings. And then establish procedures. So potentially those are already defined for you in your governing documents. If not, just figure out what works best for your organization. It can be rather informal. It can also be more formal using parliamentary procedure, which is a tool that I'll talk just a little bit more about in a few minutes. But then also ask for feedback. Ask how meetings are going. Ask how they can be more engaging. Find out what people are enjoying and what they're not enjoying. Maybe ask them that same question of, hey, what's been really effective with our meetings and maybe what hasn't? And while that can be really hard to do to ask for that feedback, it can also provide great insight on the environment, especially now that things have been going to Zoom, of, hey, how can we make this more engaging? So opening it up to conversations amongst members to find out what are they looking for when they come to these meetings. So how can you balance their wants, but also with the needs of the organization? So during the meeting, you're gonna wanna go item by item. So this is reviewing the agenda, keeping minutes. So just as important as it is to create an agenda and send it out so everyone knows what you're going to be discussing, it's also really important to record what's happening during the meeting. One, so that the organization can reference it later on, but then two, it also can help keep members up to date. So if they're unable to attend the meeting, they can read the minutes and find out what was discussed, what do they need to know, maybe what action items might have been assigned to them, but then also upcoming events, things that need to be discussed in the future. This really is just a place where people can hold each other accountable and reference what was discussed before. But then also a few years from now, someone can look back at those minutes and go, oh, no way, our organization did this event a few years ago. Maybe this is a tradition we want to continue. So with your minutes, record ideas, record votes. It doesn't always have to be super detailed, but just record any important information that might be helpful to folks in the future. And then also keep time. So stick with the times that you put on your agenda. Make sure to look and see what time it is and how you're doing. And then adapt if necessary or move things around based on priority, based on everyone's energy level, and based on the conversation. I think two attitudes really important. So when running a meeting, it's important to remain professional. So just treating everyone with respect. That looks different for every organization in terms of formality, but continuing to be enthusiastic, respectful, and then asking others to do the same. And I think it's really important to try your best to create a welcoming environment. So that might be just asking folks questions. That might be asking people to introduce themselves, incorporating icebreakers or other activities, but finding ways to continue building community, but then also for folks to know that, hey, I want you to participate, share your opinion, and sometimes that's just asking open-ended questions. I think the atmosphere is also really important. So the physical setting, so whether that's in person or via Zoom, figuring out how to make it user-friendly. And so one thing some student organizations have done that has been really helpful is creating very quick Zoom guides. So if you are meeting via Zoom, of, hey, this is how our meeting's gonna look, and here's some quick tips of how to use Zoom for the meeting, especially if they're newer to it. So figuring out how can we help and make sure people know how to log in, get the meeting ID, or if we're meeting in person, how are we going to be sitting? Are we going to be sitting in a circle so people can see each other's faces and see their reactions? Or is it where we need a screen and we need to present something and screen share? So just thinking through what kind of conversations might be had and a way to have the atmosphere match the different content. Recognition and feedback. So providing recognition, sharing out when someone had a great idea, or sharing out your praise for folks. So if there was a great event, or if you've seen someone working really hard, share that with them. I've seen different organizations do shout outs. So at the end of the meeting, having a designated 5-minute period to shout out different members and the great work that they're doing. I've seen this done both anonymously through a poll, or just having people unmute themselves, or in person just share out, hey, I saw that so-and-so did a great job at this event. And then encourage feedback and encourage discussion. So having opportunities for people to chat through. So making sure that every meeting isn't just, here's our updates, here's what we're doing. Provide some type of discussion on it and get people's thoughts so that they're not just listening to someone speak for an extended amount of time. And then I think establishing rules is also really helpful. And so some of these might be to listen, so making sure that folks are actively listening to what's happening, the expectation that people are going to be respectful of all ideas, considering what speaking rights look like. And so this is sometimes outlined within governing documents that in order to vote on something, or in order to share for or against something, that they need to be an active member. So thinking about what does that general membership look like, who needs to be involved in those conversations once again, but then figuring out, okay, how are we going to acknowledge that it's someone else's turn to speak so people aren't talking over one another? So that could be asking them to raise their hand on Zoom, asking them to send stuff in the chat, whatever's going to work best for your organization, but it's something to consider of, okay, how are we going to establish speaking rights, and how are we going to ensure that no one's speaking over one another, or that someone isn't getting their turn. And then I think lastly, in establishing rules, it's figuring out how decisions are going to be made, and making sure that it's also a group effort. So it's not just one person saying, okay, here's what we're doing all the time, but rather, once again, providing that opportunity for folks to share their opinions, what they think would work, and really providing that space during a meeting. So it feels like it was worth everyone's time, and that they feel that them attending really adds to the value of the meeting. So a few other tips and tricks is remembering that it may be necessary to move some of the agenda items to the next meeting. So while you are establishing those times, or maybe utilizing the parking lot feature, recognizing that not every meeting is going to go exactly as you had planned or as you had hoped. And so it may be necessary to be adaptable. You may have to move things to another meeting. So really just thinking about, okay, what do we need to prioritize, and then share that with folks too. So if you see that you're going to be going over time and you really don't want to have to move something to the next meeting, sharing out with them, hey, it looks like we're about to go over time. Like, we want to be respectful, but let's try to get through this one other agenda item if we can. So just once again, communicating that out to your membership. It's also really important to hand out supporting materials when items are being discussed. So sending out an email beforehand with any materials that they may need to prepare, or sharing those via Zoom through the document sharing feature or screen share, but making sure you're giving people time to look over them. So not just giving it to them for the first time as soon as you're going to discuss it, but rather beforehand. Asking prompting questions to engage participants. So finding ways, once again, to just cultivate a culture of discussion, and then ensuring that each decision has an action item and a due date. So in addition to being very specific on your agenda, when a decision's made, or if during your meeting you're talking about who's going to be taking on what task, or what action items still need to be taken, is determining, okay, these are our definitive deadlines, and then also indicating who's going to be doing it. And so maybe that's during the meeting, making it very clear and being like, okay, Caitlin, I know you're going to do this. Am I understanding this correctly? Or asking, hey, when do you think this task can be done? So just making sure that every decision or every item that needs to be accomplished, that you are having those clarifying conversations, or quick questions of like, okay, when are we going to have this done by? And then who's going to be doing it, so you can check back in on that at the next meeting. or through GroupMe, text, email, etc. outside the meeting. Summarizing the content to be certain everyone is clear. So if someone's giving an update or if there's a presentation on something, maybe just giving a few sentences summarizing it just to make sure everyone's on the same page and that no one got lost during the presentation. And so I think too, this could also just be in the chat, but just making sure everyone's on the same page and no one's getting left behind during the meeting. And then lastly, considering the use of ParleyPro. So ParleyPro is parliamentary procedure, also known as Robert's Rules of Order. This is a tool that is often used in more formal groups, but it essentially establishes how the meeting will be run and then who has speaking privileges. So motions are made. So this is the I move to blank. And so this is a tool that oftentimes is seen to be very formal, and I'm more than happy if afterwards, if anyone wants to chat more about ParleyPro or how it can be adapted to your organization. But this is something that can be adapted to fit your organization. So if you want, when making decisions, to utilize parliamentary procedure, it can be really helpful just to make sure that everyone's getting equal speaking privileges, that everyone's clear on what motions or what actions are wanting to be taken. And so this is something that if you right now see that your organization, people might be talking over one another, or there's no clear direction, or it's confusing on which direction people want to go, parliamentary procedure might be a really helpful tool that can be adapted to be less formal, but still something to help establish procedure and structure within your organization and your meetings. And then I just wanted to touch very briefly on virtual meetings and some tips for those, since we are seeing a lot more of them. And so I think it's really important, once again, to test technology, but also be adaptable. Things are going to go wrong. I know I've had some meetings where I've gone to share my screen and it just isn't working, or the computer freezes. And so, remaining creative, remaining enthusiastic, and being adaptable and realizing like, hey, that's going to happen. And just being able to laugh it off as much as you can. But definitely try to test technology beforehand so that you can try to eliminate as many of those issues as possible. But just recognize too that things are gonna happen, and sometimes you just gotta laugh it off and then hope the next time it doesn't. Consider using breakout rooms or recording meetings. So if you know that there's lots of different things that are gonna need to be discussed, or maybe you want to do more community building activities, consider using breakout rooms for smaller discussions so that folks can see each other, they can chat with one another. So breakout rooms might be a way to break up your meetings and to make it to where different activities are going on or based on committees. But that's definitely a way to still have more intimate conversations. And then in addition to taking minutes, consider recording them. So if you're doing them via Zoom like we are right now, record them so you can send out the recording afterwards so folks can look back at it, reference it, you can add it into the minutes. But Zoom allows you to save it to your cloud or your computer, so that might be a helpful way to keep people up to date if they're not able to attend a meeting. But also make sure you're sharing with folks if you're going to be recording, and let them know like, hey, we're going to be recording this, so if you don't want to be seen, make sure you have your camera off. I think also utilizing Zoom to incorporate engaging activities. So there's an annotate feature where you can draw on the screen. So this is great for icebreakers. You can do polls within Zoom or through many other platforms. Within GroupMe during your meeting, and then also incorporating icebreakers. So just little activities for people to get to know one another. These don't have to be really long. It can be as simple as when you're taking attendance, ask a fun question. So what's your favorite ice cream flavor? And when you're asking people or checking who's here, have them answer the question instead of saying here if you do take attendance, or just spend a few minutes in the chat asking fun questions and people getting to know one another. One other icebreaker we found really successful is speed friending or speed networking. So putting people, pairing them up in breakout rooms just to do a quick check-in at the beginning of a meeting. So giving them just a few minutes, maybe some fun prompting questions just to catch up and to chat before going into formal business as a large group. And then lastly, share your expectations with folks as you go into a virtual meeting. Many of us are getting Zoom fatigue, so sitting on the computer all day and having to attend another meeting after a day of classes or other meetings or events. So just share the expectations with people so that they know what the level of engagement is going to be or what you're hoping to chat about, just so that they're able to prepare for that. And then also whether or not the expectation is that everyone has their camera on Or is it okay during the meeting if people have it off and just have their audio or participate via the chat? Just make sure that that's communicated out so there's, once again, no surprises and everyone knows what the shared expectations are of the meeting and within the organization. So after your meeting, you're going to want to send out the minutes. If you recorded the meeting, send out the recording, but share out what was discussed, what happened during the meeting, what are everyone's responsibilities. So sending out, here's the things we discussed, here's a quick recap, and then any reminders for folks. So reminders of, these are the deadlines that we agreed upon, here's our upcoming events, just a quick synopsis so everyone knows this is what we chatted about, here's maybe some things we need to follow up on, and then here are general reminders or questions for next time. You can also ask for evaluation. So just, once again, informal feedback of, hey, what'd you think of the meeting? I oftentimes will do this just in passing with students in the student organization I advise of, what'd you think of last night's meeting? So just informally asking them, seeing if they're enjoying it, or maybe once again, how can it be more effective? How can it be more engaging? And oftentimes some of those tips can just be found by chatting with people. And then lastly, put any unfinished business on the agenda for the next meeting. So maybe that's something that came up in the parking lot, or something that came up that you just didn't have time, or something that needs more conversation, is right after a meeting, start that agenda for the next time. I have found it really helpful to create agendas as I go, and not necessarily just the night before a meeting. So, you know, have a working document with agenda items after a meeting and continue adding to it until the next meeting. So that way, anytime something pops up in your head of like, oh, we should probably discuss this, or we need to revisit this, then it's all in that working agenda, potentially through a Google Doc or through OneDrive, and share that out so people can add to it as well. But then sharing that with the group after the meeting and sharing your thoughts and putting them down on paper. And so I just wanted to take a moment before opening it up for questions to share some of our future student organization Zoom series. So on November 2nd, we have a session that we're partnering with Student Care and Outreach for that we're really excited about, focusing on promoting support and well-being within student organizations. So we'll be chatting more about how do you care for members, how can you promote support, how can you have well-being activities. So really focusing more on that care aspect. And so we're really thankful for Student Care and Outreach who will be joining us, sharing resources, sharing tips, and how to really promote that within an organization. And then on November 9th, we'll be having a session on assessing your organization's culture. So we'll be talking about some different tools for gauging what your organization culture is, and potentially if you want to adapt that, how to shift it. So we'll be talking more about that on November 9th. But if there's any questions, feel free to send those in the chat or unmute yourself. Or if you're watching the recording, feel free to email us. My email is listed here, or you can reach out at ugaels@uga.edu. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so I can see faces. Any questions or any thoughts? It's totally fine if not, but just wanted to open up.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Will you be sending out an email with these slides?
I would be more than
Recording?
happy to reach out to you with them, and then we'll also put the recording on YouTube. But if it'd be helpful, I'm more than happy to email it to you.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I have your email from the registration. But thank you both so much for participating. I'm going to stop this recording.